Hello and welcome to today's virtual event. My name's Lena Tasha Salter and I'm Managing Director of Movers and Shakers. I hope you've all had a really good start to your week. Now, I know many of you already know Movers and Shakers, but if you don't, we're the UK's leading property forum. We've 25 years now of experience in bringing together key players across the private and public sectors, enabling collaboration, members to connect and to win business. We put on high-level events discussing topical issues across the industry. If you've missed any of our virtual events since April, please do go onto our YouTube channel. You can download the videos, watch them, enjoy, and please do subscribe. So today, Movers and Shakers is absolutely delighted to be hosting the launch of Park Power, the future of London's green spaces with the London Collective. Now, obviously, through COVID, I think everybody's been focused more on the value of green spaces, the role of the green spaces and community. And over the summer, Park Power and the London Collective have been crowdsourcing people's opinions, their values on local parks and green spaces, what they use them for, and what they would like to prioritise the spaces for in the future. Absolutely fascinating. They've got over 3,500 respondents, and this is from across all of London boroughs. So they've got an extraordinary picture, really, of a defining moment in time. Really, really exciting. So the London Collective has been putting this project together with a diverse range of organisations, the City of London Corporation, Siemens Infrastructure, the London National Park City, Frank Bruno Foundation, Commonplace, the Dar Group, an absolutely fantastic mix. So what's going to happen today is that we're going to have 2 introductory videos for you. And then we're going to have the presentation of the ebook, which is in fact the findings, the conclusions and the recommendations from this project. So Max Farrell, CEO and founder of London Collective, will be leading this with a number of other contributors, and he will name check them. So I'm not going to list them all now, but they've done a fantastic job, I can assure you. After the presentation, we're then going to be having a panel discussion focusing on the future of London's green spaces. So we welcome for this Culvia Ranger, who is Senior Vice President, and he's Senior Vice President of Strategy and Comms, in fact, for Atos UK. Unfortunately, Fiona Brenner can't join us today, but we have Mike Saunders, who is CEO of Commonplace, which is the platform. And we also have Ailish Christian West, who is the Director of Real Estate for Get Living. And it's going to be an absolutely superb panel. They welcome from the London Legacy Development Corporation. New to the panel is Mark Camley today, who is the Executive Director for Venue and Parks. And the session's going to be chaired by Max Farrell. So I know it's going to be a good half an hour. And please don't forget that you can ask questions using the Q&A tab. So please do challenge the panel. Now, today's sponsor is Get Living. We're delighted for them for sponsoring today's event, and thank you. They are the UK's leading build-to-rent pioneer. They have neighbourhoods now in London and in Manchester, and their flagship is, of course, East Village, which is the former athletes' village from the London 2012 Olympics. Absolutely fantastic. Do let us know and we can pass on their details. So now I'm going to move forward. We've got a lot to cover. First of all, we will show you the videos, then we'll lead into the ebook presentation. Thank you and do enjoy.
At a time when parks are so precious and so pressurised, we asked Londoners what they love about them and their ideas for the future. Thousands of people responded. So, what did we learn? We want more nature and quiet places to escape to. And we want to make them easier to get to and to get around. We want to grow food and show our kids how it's grown. With community spaces for different cultures, abilities and age groups. We can make parks smarter, but tech should be invisible. Using natural materials which are recyclable, all powered by renewable energy. We have now published our research and recommendations for the future, and we'd love to hear what you think. Download the ebook and help us shape the future of our green spaces.
Hi everybody, I'm really happy about the connection between the London Collective and the Frank Bruno Foundation. I hope the Park Power launch goes well.
Well, good afternoon everybody, and thanks very much for joining us today. We're really excited to be launching the Park Power findings. We're very ambitiously going to run through this with about 10 seconds per slide. So you can of course go and look at and read the full ebook after the event by following the link, and it will be on social media, and follow that using the hashtag Park Power. Over to you, Mike, to talk about this bit.
Thanks, Max. So yeah, Commonplace has run over 750 projects with 2 million people, for councils and developers. And in these projects, green spaces are often really popular themes. So Park Power has resonated really strongly. And the enthusiasm has been demonstrated by the numbers, which you've just seen. Using our heat map, we were able to cluster all the responses by location and theme and come up with 5 parkologies to describe how the different parks are used. And these have informed the ideas you're about to see. People mostly wanted nature and quiet from their future park, and of course toilets. As well as practical things like seating and play areas, they also wanted innovation, both technological, smart bins, and natural, experimental growing. And the themes of space, nature, and relaxation are crystal clear when people talk about what's great in their park right now. It's evident that what they want is an escape from their urban lives. So using this data, the Park Power partners have generated some really exciting ideas, which we divided into categories, and you're now going to hear from the lead person in each category.
Thanks, Mike. And so with access to nature, this was a big topic and came up as one of the most important issues for people. And here we're going to have Samantha Paul from Space Hub to talk about this, and also the next section on health and wellbeing.
At a time when we are in a climate and ecological emergency, and London has just been made the world's first national park city, the time to consider and implement the future of our parks has never had such momentum. Our parks can be more ecologically rich and in turn richer green oases for people to enjoy. The public contributions made clear how much people value our parks. The first conclusion we drew is wilding. The resounding feedback is that most people value spending time in spaces that feel natural. To make our parks wilder, we need to make our city wilder by creating new green spaces and enhancing wildlife corridors. Creating green links between our existing parks allows wildlife to move more easily. Conclusion 2 is time. Nature can be created in our cities by simply changing the way we manage our parks. Maintaining our green spaces in a way that works with nature will help create parks that thrive. More horticulturally trained personnel must work to protect our existing ecological assets and work to enhance biodiversity in our parks. Conclusion 3 is food growing. The results made clear that people want more opportunities for food production and experimental growing. This connects people to nature and cities and educates young children about where food comes from. Linking experimental growing with the climate agenda would mean that sections of parks could be used as test beds, such as growing drought-tolerant plant pellets, while kitchen gardens and allotments bring communities together. The second chapter is health and wellbeing. The Park Power Initiative is delighted to have the support of Frank Bruno, founder of the Frank Bruno Foundation and a strong advocate for exercise in the open air. The health benefits of spending time outdoors and amongst a natural environment is well documented. The public feedback reiterated the need for quieter, contemplative spaces to connect with nature. In these COVID times, people want parks to better facilitate being active, from outdoor exercise to swimming. Contributions emphasize the importance of nature for mental well-being. Escape the new normal. The first London parks were designed as a response to the public health crisis, and we questioned how can our parks be reimagined to deliver their original purpose. Recommendations include how a park can facilitate social interaction, Many people suffer from social isolation. Future parks should be designed to set the stage for chance encounters and nurture a sense of community. COVID-19 has given rise to new demands on our parks. Further recommendations cater to social distancing from movable seating to covered areas to allow parks to be used despite the weather. Designing a park to the parameters of how much it can give back increases the benefits to people, the environment, and wildlife. Parks can be used for cleaner air, microclimate regulation, and psychological well-being. Another recommendation is simply plant more trees. Trees have benefits for our climate's health and people's health. Key routes between parks could become tree-lined. The final conclusion is safety. There is no one design fits all for each park, and each must be assessed to understand key opportunities and constraints that lie in its functioning between different user groups. If a park is well maintained and has an appearance of being cared for, it creates a more welcoming space. Parks should design out risk using passive surveillance and an active year-round programme.
Thanks, Samantha. And the next theme is social value and inclusivity. So how can we ensure that parks are accessible and inviting to people of different cultures, age groups and abilities? And this is over to you, Shira from Foregrounds.
Thanks, Max. So we've seen that parks have the capacity to shape the everyday urban experience and to deliver positive impacts on people's lives. And the responses of the study show that green open spaces are a critical infrastructure and that they need to provide us with a lot of different facilities to meet a variety of different needs in the city. And while parks have positive impacts, they're certainly not neutral spaces. They have the capacity to embed and even to generate inequalities in the city. So our role is to ensure that initiatives are sensitive to local conditions by conducting integrated impact assessments and then monitoring all of our interventions for possible risks and the negative impacts that they can create, as well as the benefits and the new opportunities as they arise. To create socially sustainable landscapes, their designs should encourage different patterns of behavior rather than prescribe single uses. So we want the landscape to encourage improvisation and foster creativity through adaptive and playful designs. This is while ensuring that they stay safe, of course, and that there are strategies in place for long-term maintenance. And finally, we talk about inclusive places. It means accommodating multiple dimensions of well-being simultaneously. So we acknowledge different needs and capabilities and forms of sociality in and around the park. And we design the commons as a diverse place, seizing opportunities to deliver services in the park and to encourage engagement. This can include designing both finished and unfinished spaces, so as to invite co-design and co-creation as a foundation for placemaking.
Thank you, Shira. And the next theme on technology was a collaboration between AMBX, Crafty Fish and Siemens. So we have Steve Orton from Siemens to talk us through these recommendations.
Thanks, Max. Yeah, we can use technology to future-proof our parks, and making small sympathetic changes to infrastructure creates more inclusive, community-centered spaces to enjoy. But technology should only play a role if it creates safer and more user-friendly green spaces. It should be sympathetic to a park's natural beauty, for example. So community feedback has recognized that technology has a part to play to improve cleanliness, sustainability, and usability of parks, for example, through improved lighting. So conclusion one is around having the right data on the usage of green spaces and helping us to inform decisions on how parks are maintained, improved, and which services also to provide to park users. But technology doesn't need to be intrusive. Small sensors added to benches and lighting in a park can provide anonymized usage, air quality, or cleaning data to improve our green spaces. Using technology to build a shared communication platform within a park helps users engage with the space and connects the wider community and its green spaces together. A common information platform with multiple touch points across a park helps to engage the community in an inclusive and relevant way. And this provides access to information based on an individual's preferences. Creating this digital platform helps enrich the experience of visiting a park and helps provide additional valuable services, which can be developed to meet the needs of different park users. Whether it's a virtual park map or a digital booking system for sports facilities, technology developed can be prioritized based on feedback from park visitors and through the park's own usage data. Smart connected LED lighting forms part of a park's digital central nervous system. It's central to creating a flexible, safer, and more energy efficient space. But every park is used differently. Lighting needs to be both adaptable and smart to suit all needs. Safety standards for park lighting will become an important part of the park design process. And parks are our green urban lungs. They should be a beacon for sustainability, setting the standard on carbon capture and energy usage. Thanks to technology, parks can generate and consume their own energy. It may even be possible to create more energy than is used by connecting existing energy assets that are already part of the park's infrastructure. And of course, parks play a key role in driving the awareness of sustainability. A digitally enabled park can educate its users on the topic and provide detail of the park's efforts to be sustainable.
Thanks very much, Steve. Our next theme is related, obviously, but Simon Sturgis, who many of you will know, who wrote the policies for in the London Plan and elsewhere, has looked at zero carbon.
We are now living in a climate crisis, and this has a direct impact on London's parks. Midsummer, brown grass and parched trees are becoming the new normal. We can all help change this. How we design and create our parks can make a direct contribution to carbon reduction. Together, we can improve the natural capital of our parks and reduce our carbon emissions to zero. We need to think of carbon emissions as important as sunlight or gravity, a design fundamental. We need to think of our parks as organisms that will evolve over time and respond to natural cycles. We must start with what we have and introduce the minimum of new material. New areas must be from renewable and recycled materials and not from oil-based products. Here are some of the key messages. Work with what you already have. Minimize restructuring or new works to the site. Aim to minimize maintenance. Avoid using high carbon, new oil-based materials. And use natural renewable sources of materials as a priority. Use recycled materials where possible. Avoid oil-based or non-recycled materials. Maximize wilding and habitat creation. Enable education and interaction for all those who use the park.
Thank you, Simon. And this is our penultimate theme, was active travel and accessibility. And we have Chris Sibthorpe from PJA to talk us through this topic, important topic.
Thank you. Provision for walking and cycling needs to be appropriate to the environment in which it is located. It must reflect differing mobility aspirations and the need to preserve parks as places to escape. Active travel provision doesn't start and stop at the park gates. Access to parks needs to be made safely to broaden their appeal and ensure vulnerable groups such as children and those with disabilities are not disadvantaged. Walking is the principal mode of active travel in our parks. For every cyclist, there are 9 people on foot. Pedestrians must have priority over other users so as not to impinge on their enjoyment of these green spaces. Footpath and cycle networks need to be planned as carefully as if they were parts of the highway network, with design cues to help guide visitor behaviour. Creating strong pedestrian and cycle links to parks enhances the overall journey experience. The journey to the park is only as good as the weakest link in that particular trip. Managing transitions between parks and their neighbouring areas through the provision of safe crossing points across main roads makes parks more attractive to a wide range of users. And don't overlook the importance of providing scooter and cycle parking facilities. Without these facilities, more journeys to the park might be made by car and lead to indiscriminate parking, which impinges on access to key facilities. And locate parking away from entrances, but close enough for natural surveillance. Consider solutions that enhance the natural setting of the park. Ensuring year-round access for walking and cycling is important by thinking about how footpaths and cycle tracks are used during different times of the year. And gathering evidence to see how paths are being used and considering maintenance and lighting programs is key to addressing barriers to their use.
Thanks, Chris. And our final theme was culture, and this was a collaboration between Future City and Enki Music, and we have Sherry Dobbin from Future City to talk us through this final theme.
As we need to socially distance physically, our parks have become destinations for leisure and gathering. One of the respondents noted that a skate park has transformed itself into a cultural epicenter. So we need to consider how design makes a feature of environmental responsibility, how we think about how we can encourage all ages to engage. For example, we can think about East Village and its wetlands rich ecosystem of flora and fauna and thriving wildlife that triggers an education center, signage, wayfinding, talks, and public art. In doing this, we need to consider how we build infrastructure. One of the key recommendations is the easier it is to do something, the more likely it is to happen. So we can consider things such as our bandstands as community and leisure spaces that can provide more than just pre-summer concerts, but also different activities that bring about a diverse genre and also audience. It's important that you commission a combined cultural and public art strategy that really collaborates with the design of the master plan. For example, in Belfast, the Maritime Mile created something called Links in the Chain, a framework where stakeholders could retain their unique character, but also work together to deliver a varied program of cultural initiatives. So audit your existing and your new cultural organizations that really could be resident in your park. A pavilion could host classes, rehearsals, artist studios, other activities. The Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, for example, moves to Wembley Park, where it places music at its heart into the public realm, and also for the new park that's being developed there on site. Remember that sound and music really shape our experiences. They drive endorphins, and they also override stress receptors. So really think beyond. Consider your picnic areas, your places for fitness, how they might be fitted out with acoustic, smart wiring, or listening pods. Dream how to make this easier to bring culture to your park.
And finally, Mike, you're going to talk us through the public engagement and how to keep the conversation going.
Thanks, Max. Yeah, so the public enthusiasm for Park Power has been mirrored in other conversations on Commonplace, especially during COVID. Parks, after all, are part of neighbourhoods, and one of the things that Commonplace does is to join up all of these local conversations. So, for example, Park Power respondents will be notified about other conversations in their area, and you can all participate too. As well as downloading the full ebook, you can read it by chapter and be part of the conversation about all the ideas you've seen at parkpower.commonplace.is.
Thank you very much, Mike. And just some of the credits here, like any good production, we got credits. And in particular, I want to just say a huge thank you to Andy Spicer for designing, to branding and graphic design of the ebook, and to tremendous effort on that front. To Luke Farrell, my brother, for making the film with John Moulton and Fionn Breary of Dar Group. Here you see 2 pages. This is the first one where we see the members of the London Collective, all of whom have contributed in some way, shape or form as we meet regularly and to discuss these things and to cross-fertilise ideas, as it were. I think here we see the second page of the London Collective team members. We've just launched a new website today, and we've got the Park Power film and ebook and press release are all on the news page of the website. Thank you, Tanisha Concept Culture, for designing that website in such a short space of time. And DAR Group did a fantastic job, their team, of putting together the film and doing the landscape thinking that went into that. And finally, here's the group of all the different partners and members that led on the different contributions. So thanks to the City of London and also to Siemens and to others. So please do download the ebook. Hopefully that stimulated some thoughts that we can include in the Q&A. I see there's over 100 people here now on the call, which is fantastic. And we're going to have a short introduction and questions for each of the panel members first, and then I will put to them some of the questions in the Q&A. Firstly, I'm amazed that went so seamlessly when we came up with the idea of doing 90 slides in 20 minutes with 8 speakers. I thought to myself, well, what could possibly go wrong? But there we go. We managed to do that quite seamlessly. So that in itself was a feat. Now it would be good. I think we're going to bring in the panel members, and I will introduce them one at a time, and then we can open it up to a discussion. So unfortunately. Fiona Brenner from Groundwork and the Mayor's Green Spaces Commission is unwell and unable to join us today. She doesn't think it's COVID, thankfully, but she isn't well enough to be with us. So she was involved in the Mayor's Commission, which published their findings recently, and I was going to ask her about her thoughts about the Commission and how these recommendations might add to that. It's probably worth noting that the 2 main recommendations from the Commission, one was to create a centre of excellence to champion and secure investment for London's parks and green spaces, and the other was to establish a future green space skills programme, making sure the workforce of the future is trained and managed in all aspects of park management. So it's worth sort of thinking about that, and hopefully our recommendations can feed into the work that Commission's doing. So the first panel member that I would like to turn to is Kulveer Ranger, who many of you will know from his time working in City Hall as the Director of Environment and Transport under Boris Johnson when he was Mayor. And he, during that time, was part of the team that delivered the Oyster card, Boris bikes. He prepared for the 2012 Olympics, made the case for Crossrail and established Tech City. So some pretty impressive achievements. He's now the Senior Vice President for Strategy and Communications at Atos, which is a global company working in digital with 110,000 employees in 73 countries. I suppose, Kulveer, it would be quite interesting to know from your perspective, having that sort of previous role which crossed technology and the environment. What are your initial thoughts about the recommendations that we've put forward? So you had an advanced copy of the book, albeit just a few days ago. But it was quite clear that whilst people saw technology as an enabler to help with things like air quality or management of parks, there are obvious things that people didn't want technology to do, and hardly anyone wanted to work in parks. In fact, a lot of people said they absolutely did not want working to be enabled in parks, and parks were an escape from work, and also things like disturbing the wildlife or surveillance of the public. there's clearly some other through. So it would be good to know your thoughts about that.
Yeah, thanks, Max. And first thing I want to say is just congratulations to everybody involved in putting the ebook together, the research that's been done. Your credits are extensive, so I won't name any single person because there seems to be a really big team and a good community that's focused on this. And I think that's where I'd want to start. I think, look, it gives us a lot to think about, the recommendations that have come through. And even when I was at City Hall from 2008 to 2012, at first looking at transport, but one of the things we did was bring the development of the Mayor's transport strategy and the development of the London plan together, because we knew that the impact on public spaces, public realm, and the pressure that we exert on the precious spaces that we all seek to enjoy, the common spaces, the common ground, the parks, is only increasing through the demand of city life. Now, we know that what's happening right now, the era we're living through in COVID and managing our way through, is going to increase that. We can see people want eventually, and yes, we will get to the other side of this, that sense of space. We've heard people, green flight, moving to areas where there is more green space. But London is a fantastic city that has these hubs. I say this as a born and bred Londoner. Max, you and I know this. We went to the same university, let alone, long ago. But I grew up in West London, Osterley, Lambton, Sion, Hampstead Heath, all parks and areas that interwove into my life. But not just mine, the community around it. And I think one of the challenges I'd like to highlight is the need for local champions and community. I think all your recommendations, I couldn't disagree with any of the things that have been put forward, but especially from City Hall. And when we try to look at saying, getting best practice and new policies together, we should be devolving as much as we can responsibility and a sense of ownership over parks to local people. They're their parks. And I think that's fundamental when you're looking at policies and interventions and challenges and changes going forward. So that's one thing I would say. Coming to the point of technology, and yes, look, for me, technology has played a fundamental role in almost everything that I've been involved in, and be that the implementation of things like Oyster Card, or new buses, or electric vehicles, or getting the city ready for games. Technology, technology, technology. We live in the age of a digital society. But our parks will not remain untouched by this, but we still want to maintain the look and feel. And what I always talk about, I'm a creative, and when I talk to engineers and others who are implementing projects and change, I say we must, and I knew, said in your in the research, be sympathetic to the park. Now, what does that mean? It means design. It means the actual impact, the footprint that we're going to have. Yes, we want, more information about air quality, about usage, about better utilization, about safety, but it has to be within the context of the environment. Now, I'll give you an example of where we were doing that in my time at City Hall, were things like our streetscape. I know people were, and will still be, annoyed by the amount of signage that you see up on roads, or the amount of paint that is used on our roads to kind of graffiti them with what we put all over it. I think we have to be careful about what we do to streetscape and public space as we become, in the name of making them safer and better and more usable, that we don't take away from the aesthetic and the beauty that we want in our parks. So for me, community ownership, managing the aesthetic and ensuring that we retain the beauty and the purpose of the park and what it's giving us. And then when it comes to technology, it's about digital will permeate all areas of our life, and that will be in a park as well. But I think let's be sympathetic and let's be fully aware that we don't do something to parks that enables them to become too hyper digital. That doesn't say we need to keep cramming more and more things in. Sometimes, I dare say, less is more. And I think as we look into the research that Park Power is presenting to us, I think we're hearing that from people, where she's saying, yes, we want to do things there, but it doesn't mean we want to do more and more things that take away from that basic essence, the peace, the quiet, and the beauty of a park. I'll just end by saying that, one of the policies that we put together when I was at City Hall was putting the village back into the city. And sometimes you do look backwards to go forward, because it's not necessarily a case of you can always improve. Sometimes it's a case of understanding what works really well, what it delivers, and ensuring we protect that for future generations.
That's excellent, Fulvia. Thank you very much, and very wide-ranging thoughts and comments there. And there's some really interesting questions coming through already on the Q&A, which I will put to the whole panel after the intro. So, but next, I'd like to move on to Mark Hamley, who many of you will know in the world of parks, as he is quite an internationally renowned figure, a director of the World Urban Parks. He's also currently Executive Director of Park and Venues at London Legacy Development Corporation. And before that, the Chief Executive of the Royal Parks, where he worked with my father, Terry Farrell, who was their design champion, who I was pleased to see on the attendees list for this event. So he'll be listening in, Mark. And it would be interesting to know from you, given your sort of global outlook and experience of managing historic parks like Royal Parks, as well as new parks like the Olympic Park, what you think are the biggest issues facing us moving forwards, particularly given the increasing pressure they're now under during the pandemic with the increasing visitor numbers, and what your sort of takeaways are from the recommendations you've heard today, if you like.
Thank you, Max, and can I welcome the study that's been done, both as a Scottish Londoner and as a member and director of World Urban Parks. I mean, within World Urban Parks, I guess we've been in a sort of Dickens type phase of it's the best of times, it's the worst of times, where parks have never been more greatly appreciated and more greatly used around the world, partly due to COVID, but also actually they've never been under more threat than they have been. And so the study is timely. And I think to look at the big challenges that are being talked about parks across the world, there are probably three that we're wrestling with at the moment. So one is funding, and I'm going to leave that to one side for the moment because actually there's no silver bullet to that, but it's a challenge for parks all across the globe. The second, I think, is around equity. So we've seen the challenges across the globe in relation to Black Lives Matter and other challenges. And the study brings out actually some of those small barriers that we put in the way of everybody sharing parks. So, for example, toilets comes up as an important issue because it is an important issue. If you're a younger user or an older user, actually knowing where you go to the toilet is important. Things like benches at the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, we have benches every 50 metres so that less able-bodied people can manage around the park. But even things like, and I say to Terry, things like names get in the way as well. The Royal Parks actually was a barrier for some of the kids who lived down in the Peabody Estates in Victoria because they didn't feel it was for them because it was called a Royal Park. So sometimes the things that we take for granted actually are barriers to other people using the parks, and some of them are quite easy to overcome. I think in relation to COVID, actually parks have been a real boon and have come into their own. We've done some studies ourselves which have shown that people's mental health as well as physical health has suffered, and interestingly that people's mental health more than their physical health benefited from being able to get into parks during the first lockdown that we had. So what other initiatives should we look at? So 880 cities are promoting 10, 20, 30. So this is a park for everyone within 10 minutes of where they live by 2030. Why can't we push for something like that for London? And secondly, we've seen how well low transport neighbourhoods are being grabbed by cyclists and everyone. So what about low transport parks? And parks everywhere so that we join up the major parks we've got through low transport neighbourhoods and people feel connected to the whole of the places that they live in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And yeah, I saw over the weekend on social media photos of queues of cars trying to wait to get to car parks at Richmond and elsewhere, and the authorities desperately pleading with people to go, to walk and to cycle, and I think that is a big issue, and one that PJA tried to cover and came up with some really good thinking around, and I know that was an issue back at when Terry was involved with the Royal Parks in terms of accessibility and getting across Park Lane, for example, which can be done over time, but it needs that continual advocacy, doesn't it, to make these changes. And so the next panel member is Ailish Christian West, who is the Director of Real Estate for Get Living, who we're very grateful to for sponsoring the event, and they are best known for the East Village within the London Olympic site, which has 25 acres of green space and also one of the largest new wetlands in Western Europe. But they have a more broadly a £2 billion build to rent portfolio with over 3,000 homes. And Ailish, before Get Living, was head of property at Land Security, so 20 years experience in property. And there's some relevant questions here which I'll come to from the Q&A. But just before I do, Ailish, it would be good to know from your point of view, with lockdown 2 now unfolding, and looking back at some of the more unexpected positive effects of COVID-19, has there been a renewed interest in green spaces, would you say, from within your developments and your residents? And I suppose, and then the second part of that question, what role do you think there is for developers and the private sector to make these improvements and take on board these recommendations and really engage with Londoners about reimagining their parks? So over to you.
Thanks, Max, and hello everybody. It's really great to be here and to have a chance to engage on this topic, which absolutely lockdown has, I think, probably accelerated and proved in some of the trends that we were starting to think about at Get Living around what residents of London would want in the place that they lived. And I think there's probably nothing so far that I've heard from my fellow panelists that doesn't resonate in terms of how much the residents have really, the existing residents and incoming residents have really really valued that green space access. And I think that during lockdown, our team were obviously not able to sort of do their usual face-to-face connecting with residents, but they were calling residents, checking in with them, and all of the responses around how suddenly people who'd maybe taken it for granted even realized how much of a benefit it was to be located in a place where you don't have to travel, where you can access it. And I think that's what our research and our residents' communication sort of feeds back. It really is consistent with what we see in this report. And I think this report sort of challenges our thinking even more in terms of what we can be doing with what we've learned from our residents during recent months. I mean, we've got the 25 acres. I think the wetlands are a real gem in a part of that, but also, any space that's accessible, we observed being used very well and enabling people to get out of their homes, whether they're in their homes and looking to get out to escape the noise of their home, or they're looking to get out to, to actually, because they're lonely in their home, is the green spaces offer respite for both of those reasons. So there's a lot of flexibility in the green spaces for residents to have access to. So I think for us, what we know is that you can see it in our Google reviews. All of our incoming sort of residents' experience is very much valuing that green spaces, and the word green, for example, is just like sort of going off the Richter in terms of what people are saying in social media about living at East Village. So I think it's a renewed interest, and it's great to see this report sort of corroborating that and how valuable it is for residents and for Londoners. And it's not just residents at East Village that can access the space, it's open to all. So it's got that sort of accessibility and inclusion element to it, and it absolutely plugs into the fantastic Queen Elizabeth Park. So it's great that Mark's on here. I'm sure we've got probably lots that we could connect on, Mark, at hopefully an early stage in the future. So I think that the report sort of dovetails with what we are hearing, is that people are really re-examining how they want to live. They value the connectivity to London, they value being part of London, but they want to have the ability to not access to access green spaces within that sort of on their doorstep, essentially, which is what they get at somewhere like East Village. We've also picked it up in our in our smaller neighbourhoods where there's less sort of volume of green spaces, but just small green spaces being highly valued. Even a balcony, even being able to overlook some green space as opposed to just looking right into an urban sort of highly dense can make a really big difference to people's choosing where to live, and therefore we deduct from that how they feel about where they live, how their health and well-being, etc. is. And I think people are really valuing health and well-being in a way that they've maybe not recognized before 2020. So that's coming out. And I think in terms of your question about what developers and investors into the sector and how they can engage with reimagining parks, I think it's essential. I think it's very timely for me, this report, because giving that that ongoing sort of thought to how your customers, if you're a residential developer or operator, I think all developers should be listening to this report, even if they can only, in the space they've got, deliver a small pocket park. It's so important, I think, for not just park users, but residents of London to listen to what they feel and how they will select where they live going forward, or whether they can select, or whether how they can enjoy the place that they are living now. So I think for me, we will definitely be listening to this, and it further informs my thinking about the vision for East Village and other neighbourhoods that we're working on in London. I think that some of the things that come through around the value of bringing culture and learning and art into the neighbourhood, they're sort of ideas that I've been pondering, and seeing this report really gives extra sort of evidence that is the right direction for us to go in. Some of this, the report is a great sort of way of collating that sort of voice and putting some weight to what people's ideas are, because there's the funding on the public and the private sector needs some sort of weight to how you invest and how you manage these spaces going forward. So I think that it's a fantastic report, landing for me at Get Living perfectly timed as we rethink and reimagine our own green spaces. And I would really encourage all private developers, even if they don't have the option of sort of 25 acres of green spaces in somewhere like East Village, then I still think it's worth thinking about how you either enable access and think about how developments of the future have that very small but very important element of green spaces, which people will really value. And I think it will make commercial sense as well as sense for the community and the neighbourhoods that we build.
Fantastic, thanks Eilish. And I know that our members, Future City, that led on the culture section of the report, are working with you on some ideas for East Village, and I really look forward to seeing the outcomes of that and how we can start to put these ideas into practice. And there's some questions there that are relevant from the Q&A that are relevant to some of the things you said around funding and the relationship between the public and private sector, which we can come back to. But just before we do, the final panel member is Mike Saunders, who we've heard from earlier in terms of Commonplace leading on the public engagement side. And Mike, I might go straight in with one of the questions from the Q&A, seeing as we've got about 10 minutes left, as it relates to as it relates to the engagement that we did. And just before we do, though, it's worth saying that Commonplace it used these sort of digital tools quite broadly to gather ideas from the public about placemaking, and have worked with city governments like London, Newcastle and Bristol, as well as developers like Grosvenor, Granger and Lendlease. So building up a really a good sort of set of data around what people think about the planning process, and also increasingly now about the importance of public realm. But Mike, we have one of the questions here was saying, how did you find engaging with people during lockdown, and presumably using online methods only? And because we kicked off this project in June, that was a par for the course. But the question is, did this have an impact on the range of people who responded? And how can we reach different groups who might not, for example, have access to technology? And I think that's a good and valid question. So,
yeah. Thanks, Max, and thanks for the question. It's a very, very good question. So for this particular project, the engagement has happened digitally. We launched it as a digital project. It was actually launched as part of the London Festival of Architecture Digital. And we've got all of this diverse set of responses digitally. I think we've obviously changed quite a lot in terms of how engagements are happening on a whole range of different projects. So as Max mentioned, we work with councils and developers around the country. And over the last 8 months, a lot of engagement has shifted to digital. And it's a really good question about how we make the balance between what you can do digitally, who accesses digital, and how you can fill the gaps. And I think one of the great things that digital can do, we can shown in this project, is that you can get great response rates, you can get great reach. I think you can also reach communities that or parts of communities that sometimes are less likely to show up for certain types of events. But I do think there's a really interesting area which is about how do you integrate the digital and the face-to-face. And it's something that we've always been really keen on. So we've always been really interested in making the engagement process continuous, whether you're taking part, digitally, or you're attending a meeting, or you're talking to somebody face-to-face. And I think this is an area where there will be some really interesting innovations coming up. And some of the projects that we've been involved in have made really good use of the information that you can get digitally to plan non-digital activities. So one of the great things about digital is you can see demographic information about who's participated and who hasn't, and sometimes filling in those gaps does require face-to-face or events that are planned that aren't digital. But by having that digital information at your fingertips, you can plan and deploy your resources accordingly. And similarly, we've been working on other projects where some really, I think, interesting and innovative work has been done on paper-based materials, but integrating those very much into the full range of engagement activities, and making sure that the responses that you get in paper-based, that you can upload those into the digital dashboard, the Commonplace dashboard, so you can do all of the analysis together and have all of the data in one place. So I think it's really interesting time, and there's lots of opportunity for developing the whole engagement offer and making it continuous and making it integrated between all the various different forms.
Thanks, Mike. And we don't have much time left, but I wanted to just link together two questions that we've had from the audience here. And the first one from Sarah Berry, asking, how do we ensure the wants and needs of diverse groups from different backgrounds are incorporated in our parks? Something that I know that Fiona Brenner, if she was on the panel, would have been good to talk about, because it was something that she was looking into in detail as part of the Mayor's Commission. And the second part of that question from Tim Webb who is a trustee of the National Park City Foundation, and that great movement that's made London the world's first national park city, raising a question that has been in the press recently about the concerns of women who previously enjoyed exercising in parks during the first lockdown, but don't feel safe doing so now with the dark winter evenings, and how can tech solutions help with that, but also what more can be done to reassure women, in particular through design or messaging. So I wonder, Mark, if there's anything, if that's an issue in terms of inclusivity, but also in terms of specifically around the darker evenings and how that affects women's attitudes towards being out in parks.
Thanks, Max. So on the inclusivity, one of the things we've done at Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park is right at the beginning at design stage, we engaged a youth panel and a built environment access panel to give us views of both probably the most able in terms of mobility and the least able in terms of mobility on the design of the park. But actually speaking to them at the design stage isn't enough. And so we've continued speaking to them and they continue to meet regularly and they continue to input. And we now have 2 members of the youth panel on our LLDC board to make sure that actually we uphold on the things that they would like to see in the park. So it's speak early, speak often, and make sure that people are involved in the future and the here and now, and that they continue to be engaged. On actually making parks safe, then things like lit routes are important. So be clear about where your lit routes are, where there's lighting, where there isn't, and signage so that people are clear of where they are. I think also thinking about things like getting people to buddy up so that they come into the park with a partner and feel more, meet up in an area where perhaps they feel safer and do that. I think in the Olympic Park, we benefit from a lot of CCTV, which gives people reassurance, but that's not ideal for all parks and certainly isn't an investment I would suggest for all parks.
Thanks very much, Mark. And I would just like to also point out that it was important to us having the City of London Corporation as a partner in this project. And I know that they are doing quite a lot of work and thinking, particularly because they own parks of so many different diverse types and in different places, like ranging from Hampstead Heath to West Ham and Epping Forest and the different communities. And I'm very sorry that Colin Buttery, I think, who's the director of parks, had some technical problems and wasn't able to join us today. But I just wanted to say a big thank you to him and to them for their role in this. So the final question of the last couple of minutes we have, if we have time, from Alex Tizzetti at View City. How can parks and green spaces contribute to the net zero city? So the importance of parks being carbon sinks, and I think with London being, almost half of it being green space, this has to be an important, they have to have an important role to play. And how can we measure the impact and important contribution parks make to London becoming a net zero city? Kulveer, perhaps you might want to take that. I know that Atos are leading in zero carbon from a sort of digital point of view. How do you think that we can address that in terms of the role of parks moving forward?
Yeah, no, thanks, Max. And we are, as a business, it's a little known fact, we're #1 in the Dow Jones Global Sustainability Index for IT providers. Now, what does that mean to everyone and what does that mean to parks? Well, the point is that in every area of everything that we're doing, we're using energy and more digital services and more technology. And whether that will be safety, security, lighting, connectivity, it will have an impact, and that impact will be faced and felt in our green spaces. So we're trying to dampen that and redesign to make sure that happens. I think as we look at systems and the way people approach parks, I think it's important that that's built in. Net zero is built into every single thing we do. We are one of those big organizations that sit behind a number of things. We run banks, we run public services, we run retail organizations, but we can help all those services really in their supply chains, in the way they use data centers, in the way they apply technology to, by design, be net zero. We're committed, by the way, to 2035 to being net zero ourselves. And I don't just mean us, I mean our entire supply chain as well. So we're helping our partners and everyone else. And that's what we need to do around parks. But I think the other thing is that, and I want to point out from the previous question, what is the most important thing that I take away from this conversation if we can change things for the better? Design. We must put the emphasis on design, and design is something that sometimes can be mixed up with requirements. We hear people who have requirements and what people want. That's essential, whether it's accessibility, whether it's safety and security, whether it's lighting. But it must be designed by people who understand what is required to deliver creative, engaging, sympathetic design. So let's not lose the conversation around design as we talk about requirements. I see that happen very often, especially in overly engineered environments, which sometimes can come into our parks, especially when policy is being designed. And finally, just to say, it is all about community. If we get that local ownership, there's always, when we talk about parks and we talk about what do they want, there's always been a community there, and there's always been people there who are using the park. If we can tap into those people, the energy, even if it's latent, and the enthusiasm that they've probably had for years, but help them organize, help them link in with other people. I think there were other questions earlier about sustainability through funding and keeping things going and management. That comes from being local. That comes from people feeling a sense of ownership. And I think, to me, if there were two things that I would take away from this conversation, design as part of requirements, but design first, and community being local and ownership, and then ongoing management and responsibility for keeping things going.
Excellent. Thanks, Colville. And I absolutely agree. I think that those are the two very much sort of overriding themes. What we tried to do with the report was to really put out there some positive and proactive design solutions. I think quite often with public space, there's a concern that a lot of it is around policies telling you what not to do, rather than creative solutions for enabling people to do what they want to and need to do, and particularly when there's so many limited options in terms of socializing and culture and the arts at the moment. So we have to intensify the use, but also mediate the tensions between the different users of parks and make sure they do the most good for the most number of people. So I can see that Lee's joined the call, which is telling me that we've come to the end of our time, but I'd just personally like to say a huge thank you to all of you on the panel. Thank you to everyone that was involved in putting this project together, and just also appeal to everyone to go and download the ebook, which should be on the Commonplace website now in sections, so you can actually comment on each of the sections and keep the conversation going, and watch the film, and I hope you all get something out of it, because it's been a pleasure doing it, and it's an important project at this moment in time, I think. So thanks everyone, and thank you to you, Lee, and Movers and Shakers for organising the event.
No, thank you so much, Max, and thank you to all of our contributors today, and that includes obviously the contributors for the ebook. It's absolutely fascinating. It's been a complete one-off event and very different and very meaningful, Max. I think it's such a timely project, like you've all said, and I love that Colby are bringing in the community at the end, because I think that is absolutely central. And I think it would be great to replicate this kind of initiative in other areas in the country. But again, like you say, it's going to be so specific to the locality and the neighbourhood. And, everybody in that area must have a buy-in and a role. And, what it can do for mental health, for, zero carbon, and just general well-being. It's fantastic. And I think, like people are saying, with COVID, there are some positives coming out. I think people are realising the importance and what they should be using, what they can be using these spaces for, and to preserve them. So fantastic, the ebook. We will be circulating it as well, Max, to all of the attendees today. We'll make sure they have a copy, and on social media. So no, thank you all so much. And thank you to Get Living for, of course, sponsoring today. We've got another couple of events coming up. We've got later this week on Thursday, the Changing Development Agenda of the Southwest. And we're going to now, I've decided, be sending that e-booklet to all of our panelists, I think, because I think it would be absolutely brilliant for them to actually respond to that. And for our event next week, where we're covering development in the Northwest. So we'll make sure they all get copies and feed into the Green Spaces agenda. Thank you so much to everybody. Again, thank you to Get Living and our panel, and take care from our families to yours.